When we think of conflict, we usually picture a direct confrontation, two opposing forces clashing symmetrically, where the rules of engagement are visible, and you can see exactly where an attack originates. But an attacker who wants to bypass your defenses entirely will use a flanking maneuver. They refuse direct engagement to strike where you aren't looking. In human relationships, this indirect maneuver is known as triangulation. Triangulation functions as a calculated tactical choice employed to gain unilateral control over a relationship's narrative without risking the vulnerability of a head-on confrontation. This imagery illustrates the nature of coercive control. The manipulator operates as a system architect. Like a puppet master pulling invisible strings, they govern external relationships to destabilize their primary target. To achieve this, the architect introduces a third party into the dynamic, an ex-partner, a colleague, or a mutual friend. The presence of this third person immediately shifts the balance of power. By governing the flow of information between the target and this third party, the manipulator ensures their claims remain unverified. Isolation occurs not through physical distance, but through the corruption of communication. The target is forced to fight a proxy war. They expend their energy defending themselves against a manufactured rival, while the true aggressor rewrites the target's reality from a safe distance. Understanding our vulnerability to this tactic requires looking at the structural architecture of human relationships. In the 1950s, psychiatrist Murray Bowen observed a consistent pattern in what he called family systems theory. Bowen's axiom states a two-person emotional system, a dyad, is inherently unstable. Under intense stress, the connection begins to fracture. To survive, the dyad seeks a third point. Bringing in a third party distributes the tension, restoring geometric stability. In a healthy environment, this third party functions as a pressure valve. Venting to a trusted friend after an argument can help stabilize a relationship. However, because human emotional systems are hardwired to invite third parties in during times of stress, they possess a built-in vulnerability. This structural tendency creates an exploitable backdoor for anyone looking to exert control. The manipulator takes this natural stabilizing mechanism and weaponizes it. Instead of relieving tension, they use the third node to actively generate it. Psychologists call this corrupted structure the perverse triangle. Watch how the geometry changes. The manipulator at the top merges their connection with the third node, forming a unified front that presses down on the isolated target. The function of the perverse triangle is to build a covert alliance. The abuser aligns with a child against a tenant, or with a coworker against a peer, creating a solid block of opposition. The danger here is the lack of visibility. The target believes they are struggling in a one-on-one relationship. Unaware, they are actually absorbing the coordinated force of a two-on-one assault. Once the target is structurally isolated, the manipulator attacks their cognitive framework. This process relies on Leon Festinger's theory of social comparison. Festinger's hypothesis 2 states that when objective, non-social measurements aren't available, humans are driven to evaluate their abilities and self-worth by comparing themselves to others. A manipulator hijacks this drive by supplying a rigged comparison point.
They constantly measure the target against an idealized ex-partner or a favored colleague, deliberately triggering the target's insecurity. We can map the specific execution of this rigged comparison. The manipulator might overtly flirt with strangers, mention how an ex never had these issues, or claim that everyone in their social circle shares a specific negative opinion of the target. The manipulator acts as the sole judge and jury. By dictating who the target is compared to, they ensure the victim will always lose the competition for validation. It is a systematic erosion of self-esteem disguised as casual observation. This process scales up from individual comparisons to group dynamics. According to David Cycleback's research into tribalism, our brains are heavily influenced by the perception of group consensus. In a mature triangulation maneuver, the target is surrounded by a fabricated, hostile outgroup. Notice how the isolated shape is rapidly enclosed, triggering deep evolutionary dread. Our neurobiology is wired to categorize the world into an in-group we belong to and an out-group that threatens us. Rejection by the tribe signals a threat to our survival. The abuser synthesizes a fake consensus, a phantom army. They deploy phrases like,
everyone thinks you're being unreasonable, or our friends agree with me, projecting the weight of a crowd onto the isolated target. The irony of this warfare is its asymmetry. The people making up this phantom army often have no idea that their names and alleged opinions are being weaponized in a private battle. Forced to fight these fabricated shadows, the victim is severed from objective reality. The resulting paranoia and cognitive dissonance break down their ability to trust their own mind. When you combine structural isolation with the corruption of self-evaluation, you reach the psychological endgame. The pressure of this invisible coalition boxes the target in. Every attempt to move is blocked, pushing the node back into a shrinking, rigid perimeter. This state of psychological exhaustion is known as learned helplessness. The target stops trying to escape because every previous attempt has been met with coordinated resistance. This environment is sustained through gaslighting. The abuser injects phrases like "you're crazy" and "you're overreacting" into the target's daily life. In a state of learned helplessness, the victim may begin to internalize these statements as their own character flaws. The cycle reaches its equilibrium when the target stops fighting the perimeter altogether and begins policing their own reality on behalf of the abuser. If this maneuver is so effective, why is it fragile? The very isolation that exhausts the victim is the system's greatest weakness. It requires the victim to remain an observer, never a participant. To break the cycle, the target must refuse indirect information. Stepping outside the established geometry snaps the lines of control. The target bypasses the manipulator, demanding direct, unmediated communication with the third party, bypassing the architect's control. When the victim moves from isolation to direct engagement, the psychological pressure begins to lift. They verify the facts and recognize that the hostile consensus, the phantom army, was an illusion. A manipulator's power relies entirely on the victim accepting indirect information as truth. The moment you insist on direct, symmetrical communication, the perverse triangle collapses and the puppet strings are severed.